Hey everybody, welcome to this week's lesson. We're going to be back on Romans this week. We took a couple weeks off doing some other things, and now we're back on Romans. So we're about to go into Romans 7:7 and the following verses. If you remember in verses 1 through 6, Paul was talking about how Christians relate to the law. And in verse 7, he's going to continue talking about how Christians relate to the law. Prior to that, he was talking about union with Christ. And so that'll play in later as we get toward the bottom of this little passage. So I'm actually not going to put it on screen today. If you need to turn to this passage, turn to it. This is Romans 7 through 13, excuse me. So again, I'm not going to put this on screen, so turn to it yourself. Starting in verse 7. What then shall we say? That the law is sin? By no means. Yet if it had not been for the law, I would not have known sin. For I would not have known what it is to covet, if the law had not said, you shall covet. But sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, produced in me all kinds of covetousness. For apart from the law, sin lies dead. I was once alive apart from the law, but when the commandment came, sin came alive, and I died. The very commandment that promised life proved to be death to me, for sin, seizing an opportunity through the commandment, deceived me, and through it killed me. So the law is holy, and the commandment is holy and righteous and good. Did that which is good, then, bring death to me? By no means. It was sin producing death in me through what is good, in order that sin might be shown to be sin, and through the commandment might become sinful beyond measure. So this is a passage, and I was actually reading just a few minutes ago, that of two conservative Bible scholars that I would recommend to you guys if you ask, who should I read? There were people that I thought were good theologians. They were disagreeing about what this passage meant. So we're coming into a passage that is not universally understood in the same way. That's okay. I'm going to give you the basic idea, and in places where, which this is actually going to become more of a problem next week, but in places where there's kind of not a consensus on what exactly it means, I'll make that clear to you, but I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. So imagine you're standing in an open field with a bow and some arrows. And as you shoot your arrows into the field, you're just kind of playing around, you're shooting. You may notice that you'll get stronger. The arrows will go further. You may learn how to shoot straighter and keep things kind of where you want them to go. But how do you know that you're actually getting better? How do you know that you're a good archer if you're just shooting into an open field? So this is what Paul is getting at here. God revealing the law is like someone dropping a target out in the middle of that field. So you can be shooting your arrows all day, no worries, and you'll probably start to think that you're actually pretty good. And people do this, they live their lives and they say, I'm a pretty good person. I generally don't lie. I generally don't steal. I'm pretty much an okay person. And as long as I'm an okay person, I'm okay. But that's not the standard we're measured by. We're not standard. If we're just shooting into the open field, that's not a good measurement of the truth. So what happens is when someone puts a target on that field, when God places the law in front of us, we probably realize, that's a little further away than I'm able to shoot. And it's a little bit smaller, so even if it were closer, I probably wouldn't be able to hit it. And what the target is doing is revealing a standard for what a good archer is. And God placing the law in front of us is telling us this is what a good person is. A good person follows this law. And what you'll probably realize is that you can't measure up to it. And so what the law does, and this is what Paul is getting at here, what the law does is when you place it in front of someone, it reveals the depth of their sinfulness. This is what he means when he says, it was sin producing death in me through what is good, in order that sin might be shown to be sin. And this makes sense. How can we know what sin is if we don't have a standard to measure it by? And that's what the law does. Now, you're probably thinking that's a little bleak, and we're going to unpack this some more later on. But this is just a taste of what we're going to get to. If you remember previously, Paul was talking about how Christians are united to Jesus. And Jesus perfectly fulfilled the law. What this means is, and this is again going back to how we're not bound by the law. We're not bound by the law because we're united to Jesus. But Jesus is the perfect archer. He hits the target every single time without failed bullseye. And because we're united to him, we don't have to worry about hitting it ourselves. Now, we need to get better, and because we're united to this perfect archer, we're under his tutelage, he's training us, and we'll unpack that some more as we get further in. But we're no longer required to hit the target perfectly every single time. And that's a wonderful thing. That's a glorious thing. Just something that's a fun fact. I'm using this archery example. The Greek word for sin in the New Testament is hamartia. And that word actually means roughly failure to hit the target. It's an archery term. It's about shooting arrows. And so this is actually kind of you'll probably hear people use the same illustration with the target. It's an apt illustration. But I think that's a helpful way to think about it, that the law is a target and we're aiming at it. And when we sin, we're literally missing the mark. And every arrow we fire is going to miss. But we're united to Jesus, who always gets the bullseye. So a couple questions. Again, they're down below the email that you're getting this video in, but just a couple questions. How do you compare to the law? Again, these questions are going to have clear answers in this particular case. But how do you compare to the law? And do you ever reflect on how you measure up? Compare yourself to the law. Tell yourself, like, how do I compare to the law? The law is well summarized in the Ten Commandments. You can look at that and just go through the Ten Commandments and say, like, am I following these perfectly all the time? It's a good question to ask yourself. And so once you've thought about that, and you'll probably realize, you will realize that you don't measure up to the law. You can't meet God's standard. So where do you turn? Where do you turn when you don't measure up to God's law? And again, I've revealed the answer to that already in the lesson. And so that's my prayer, that this would encourage you to turn to Jesus, to turn to the one who hits the mark every single time. So that's the lesson for today. Remember, we're praying for you, and we hope to see you soon.